Well, the Nigerian Labour Congress and the federal government have been at daggers drawn over the new national minimum wage.
Indeed, no firm agreements have been reached despite assurances from government that it is committed to alleviating the hardship of the Nigerian worker by improving their welfare. As a result, organized labor threatened to embark on a nationwide strike if the 14-day ultimatum issued to government elapses without their tripartite committee meeting to continue negotiations.
But their threats employed to force government's hand did not get the expected response from government. Labour Minister Chris Ngige last week hit back at the union, accusing them of blackmailing government over ongoing negotiations. The 14-day ultimatum may go without resolving the issues as politics has become government's focus with the 2019 general election fast approaching.
Now we still have Ayodele Adio with us in the studio to discuss this. Thank you for staying with us, Ayo. Now, joining us from our Abuja studio is the National President of the National Association of Nigerian Nurses and Midwives. He is also the newly elected National Chairman, National Public Service Joint Negotiation Council. Good morning to you and thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning, the team of TVC Breakfast.
Thank you, Comrade Alani.
All right. Now, first off, are you impressed with the way things are at the moment with the negotiation of the new minimum wage in the country?
To say the least, every Nigerian workers are displeased with the spate of the negotiation and the manner with which the federal government is handling the negotiation. One expects that a government should take care of its employee, but a situation whereby the government leaves the employee to wander about and to suffer for what they are not expected to suffer for, it calls for attention, not only of the workers, but every citizen of this country. It has become the culture of Nigerian government, even during the colonial era, where strike was recorded to have lasted for about 45 days in 1945, up to what happened in 2006, 2007, and up to the present moment. The Nigerian government has been charlatan and they have been so irresponsive to the requests of Nigerian workers. And this is very, very appalling and need the contribution of every citizen of this country to call the government to order.
Okay, Comrade Adenji will come back to you shortly. It seems like every time it comes to labor and government, it takes a long time for both sides to have an understanding. This committee, the tripartite committee we're talking about, was inaugurated or set up in November last year. They started work in March this year, and up until now, there were promises made even from all sides. Don't worry, we're going to give Nigeria a new minimum wage. Everything was looking good. But here we are. Why is it so difficult for negotiations and for all sides meeting to come to a resolution?
To be honest with you, I think the problem where negotiations are very difficult is because sometimes, understandably so, the people who lead these negotiations usually focus on a fraction of the issue, right? And listen, it's no news that the welfare of workers in Nigeria have been treated with so much levity and the value placed on the average Nigerian worker has significantly dwindled over the years. And there's no doubting that. But you see, the real problem is not just the wages paid by the government in terms of minimum wage to that worker. The real problem is a socio-economic reality that puts that worker in a precarious position, and not just that wage itself. It's the monetary policy, it's the consumer price index, it's the lack of effective transportation, it's the lack of good public education. And so these workers have to pay you know, 10 times what they would have normally paid.
Pressure on the amount of money
to get an education, you see. So the problem actually is not just the wages that are being paid directly, but a whole lot of systemic issue that have made that wage that that worker receives impossible to take him home. So the battle now has to be, you know, or the negotiation has to be the fact that these issues have to be taken into consideration. And those negotiations do not just have to be basically about wages, but about the policy positions of the government of the day to ensure that whatever policy positions that are being taken by the government have a positive effect on the welfare of the average Nigerian worker. It will shock you to know that between 1974 and 2011, I think, the real minimum wage has dropped by 60%, even though it looks like it's increasing on paper. And why is that? Because the rate of inflation, you know, has been the elephant in the room. The value keeps dropping significantly. You know, so in fact, I think it was Professor Tayo Aderemi of the University of Ibadan, Department of Economics, who, you know, did a fantastic research that showed that, you know, wage policy has a negative effect on the welfare of the workers that's intended to actually support, because it affects two major things, which is the price or the cost of goods and the employment, you know, of these people. So we have to rethink the way we negotiate these things so that we can come to better conclusion. Because when we pressured, I mean, the 2011 elections, you know, when the government at the time increased minimum wage from 7,500 to 18,000. Everybody were excited going to elections, but what did that lead us to? People could not pay salaries. Inflation. We're owing, everybody could, state government started to owe, we're borrowing to pay salaries, you know, and all of that,
and
putting
here
pressure.
we are now.
And state governors, of course, have said the same thing, that many of them are owing. So how would they be able to pay the new minimum wage? Let me come to you now again, Mr. Adeniji Alani. I hope you heard what our guest in the studio said, but if you didn't, he's talking about labor unions taking a new stance, you know, a new approach into negotiating with the government when it comes to their welfare, that it should be about pushing for better policy to help the civil servants instead of asking for reviewed minimum wage every time, because if a good policy is not in place, regardless of the amount being paid to a worker, it won't be enough. What do you have to say?
Well, policy is a welcome development that will be able to at least put the negotiation at a very feasible and regular pace. But much as the policy is important, every person that has participated or watched the trend of events in this issue of present negotiation, we know that this is an evidence-based negotiation. Let me say that it is not the issue of policy alone, because in 1928, there is Convention 26 and Recommendation 30. In 1970, there is Convention 131 and Recommendation 135 of the International Labour Organization, of which Nigeria is a party to. All the issue that has to do with the salary negotiation were put there. Let us equally put on record that it is this government that agreed that in 2001 there will be about 25% increase in the salary. Unfortunately, they also agree that in 2002 there will be 15% increase. All these things are guiding principle, and there's nothing we can do to it other than to negotiate, because the government, who is the employer, are also the one that are fixing wages through their salaries and wages commission. Most of the negotiation we are having today are as a result that the government is not adhering to the negotiation mechanism that the law of the country put in place. I agree that if the government put a policy, the government and the workers put a policy on ground, it will assist us. But it is at the table of the federal government that they will never agree, collective bargaining agreement will never be attended to. Let me say that from 1945 to around 2007, Nigerian labor force had gone on industrial disputes with the government, and most often this led to industrial action for about 15 times. In a well structured government, you don't need the workers to go on strike before before you implement what you have agreed to implement for them. The issue of wages and salaries is not just a dash or a philanthropic activity of the government. What the government is doing is to compensate the worker for a bit of what the workers are doing. And not only this, it is this labor that creates the wealth that people are just using the way they are using. We believe that there are enough evidence that should have compelled the government not to allow any issue of salary negotiation in this country to degenerate into industrial action. And with the issue of policy and no regular negotiation, there is no place where there is static salary or wages. It has to be reviewed in trend with the social reality, with the economic reality, with the inflation trend, with what is operating within the markets in this country, because a worker cannot be isolated. We are in a society that you have to fend for everything. More so, even during the issue of Shonekan committee, most of the salaries and wages of workers in Nigeria are being taxed. We are contributing, we are creating the wealth, and we are contributing to the economic development of this country as workers. Why must we be deprived of our own benefits? And this will lead to regular and incessant agitation from the workforce until when the government is ready to abide by the collective bargaining agreement that are on ground. Okay. Realistically, we are asking for 66,200. And when you look at what is the rate of this thing, even in the international market, you will see that Nigeria is one of the countries that is earning the less salaries and wages. And what justification will government have? At a point in time when we are deliberating about 4% to 12.5%, the Nigerian political class had about 800% increase in their own emolument. Why should we say that the workers will not agitate for wage increase?
All right, comrade.
Definitely, we have to agitate.
Yes,
for wage increase.
Comrade Alani, let me stay with you on this. The Minister of Labour, Chris Ngige, has said that there are procedures by which this recommendation from the committee will get to before it can be implemented. You have given government 14 days. The minister said from the committee level, they have to submit their report to the government. The government has to forward it to the Federal Executive Council. The Federal Executive Council has to forward it to the National Economic Council. And then the National Economic Council has to forward it to the National Assembly for them to pass it before the president assents. How feasible is this within the 14 days that you have given government?
The committee was inaugurated in November last year. And both the government and the workforce and even NECA, the Nigeria Employment Consultative Association, agreed that by August this year, all the negotiation will have been completed, and nothing should have held us back. All this issue of going to the National Economic Council or whatsoever are just delay tactics. They are not in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I agree that the president needed to give assent, and then the House of Assembly, the legislative arm, need to legislate on this matter. All other things that have been put in it are just a way of delaying the process. The issue of National Economic Council is not in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It is the making of the government, and they supposed to have done this, because every machinery to do this are the purview of the federal government. Issue of 14 days ultimatum, remember that this 14 days ultimatum was not given in November or December last year. This has just been given based on the attitude of the federal government to the negotiation. How can a government that knows that is responsible and supposed to be responsive to the workers' welfare put negotiation in a way that no person will be left in doubt that there is levity in handling the affairs. It is this issue that led to the giving of the ultimatum, and it is better for everybody to see it in that light, to know that if labor creates wealth, we must be able to ensure that the labor that creates wealth must be taken care of very well. The 14 days ultimatum, the way I see it, the government should work within those days, because the negotiation has started since last year, and every arm or every stakeholder in this negotiation is aware that labor is so patient enough. We have exercised enough patience, and we have done what we are expected to do. Up to the time we are talking now, the federal government is yet to take even their own stand to the negotiation, but the workforce has been able to give the negotiation committee what it takes to take the decision. All
right, Comrade Alani, we'll come to you in a bit. Let me come to you now, Ayodele. The Labour Minister, Chris Ngige, asked the new minimum wage committee to adjourn indefinitely, just about the time the committee was finalizing its work to arrive at a figure, to submit to the government. Now, some are tagging that as suspicious, that he was just acting out a script all along. Do you suspect any foul play?
I don't want to suspect anything here. I think the Labour Minister is between a rock and a hard place. And I don't want to sound insensitive, because I'm a Nigerian worker. I buy from the same market, and I understand the socioeconomic reality. But, he said two things I agree with. First of all, he said the emoluments, of political office holders have increased. That's where your fight should go to, first of all, that you should earn based on the economic realities of Nigeria, and you should wrestle that to the ground. But secondly, and most pertinently, he talked about evidence-based. What are the evidences on ground? The evidence is simple. First of all, in fact, I think it was a World Bank economist, Giuseppe Rossi of the World Bank, who measured, who did a study that showed that the cost of labor in Nigeria is higher than that of Vietnam, India, and Indonesia. Now, these are the countries that are competing with you for light manufacturing. And you understand that in a globalized economy, where companies set up their manufacturing plants are largely determined by the cost of labor, right? So we're talking about a country that has a high rate of unemployment. And this is where the issue is. Do we want to create more jobs? Because the private sector is going to obviously pass that same cost back to the consumer if you increase his own wages. And consequently, the same money that you have increased or you have earned as the worker,
you go back from products.
You just go back. It's just a vicious cycle. The productivity, again, of the average Nigerian worker, if you compare that with most emerging economies, I mean, the productivity of Nigerian worker is $3.5 per hour. You compare that with a country like Mexico, that's about $11, or by Turkey, that's like $29 per hour. So you can see that the productivity of the average Nigerian worker is extremely low.
So in essence, it seems that you can even achieve more and do more for the civil servants and Nigerians generally by firming up the currency and even doing something that will be effective and have positive impact on the economy.
Exactly. You see, at every time in a nation's life, if you'd call it, you have to decide what the most important issue is at that time, right? And those important issues will decide your policy choices. As we speak, unemployment is a real problem. People can't find jobs. Underemployment is even a worse problem in Nigeria, right? So if you have to create jobs, you cannot muscle the private sector, okay, to pay salaries that it cannot afford, because nobody is going to create jobs when they are not earning more. So if unemployment is the real problem in Nigeria, you cannot push for positions that are going to box the private sector into a corner, or for startup entrepreneurs who want to employ labor to make it impossible or difficult for them too. You also have to look at the quality of the labor that we have again in Nigeria. If you look at the construction industry, for instance, you see that most are populated by Togolese and people who come to do better tiling work and better, So there's a problem with the quality of our labor. There's a problem with the cost. So all of these issues have to be critically looked into for us to arrive at some sort of a market-based reality. And of course, I do not agree that a national minimum wage should be set by the center. I do not agree, because the cost of living in Lagos is different from the cost of living in Birnin Gwari, and the financial conditions of a place in Zamfara is different from the financial conditions in Lagos State. So if Lagos can afford a certain amount of minimum wage, it doesn't mean Zamfara.
Governors said that, they demanded that they be allowed to set minimum
that's
wage.
The way
but the NLC is not agreeing with that.
That's the point. I can't. There's no way I can agree that a central minimum wage can be set. At best, it can be done regionally, but it would be unfair, for you to expect the governor of Zamfara State to pay the same minimum wage with the governor of Lagos.
It
would just be totally. It wouldn't be realistic.
Let me bring him back, Comrade Abdurrafiu here. Let's even talk about the issue of the capacity and the ability to pay by states, because that's even where the bulk of the issue is. Because when it comes to federal government, the federal government takes the largest chunk of revenue. So if you raise it to 1 million, I believe the federal government can even pay. But the states are having issues with even coping with the salaries as it is right now. Many of the states are owing salaries up to about 7-8 months. If this money you've mentioned, 66,200 is a recommendation. Maybe at the end of negotiation it may come down a little bit, but if they can't pay 18,000 as it is right now, how much do you think is going to be as a challenge going forward if the new minimum wage is implemented? Comrade.
Thank you. Ayodele has mentioned some issues, but he needed to be corrected on some issues.
Let's hear you.
The issue of productivity, the issue of quality of Nigerian workers, who is responsible? A worker that is employed and put to work without infrastructure, how do you expect the productivity of that person to go up? He has also mentioned that he do not agree with minimum wage. It means that anybody that owes this fuel is working against the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Comrade Alani,
what does minimum wage means?
Comrade Alani.
Minimum wage.
Comrade Alani, first, before you move on, let's just clarify. He never said he didn't support minimum wage. He said he didn't support the federal government setting minimum wage. That was what he said. You can go ahead now.
I can go ahead. It doesn't change my idea about this. The situation is that the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria put the issue of negotiation at the purview of the federal legislator. And the meaning of minimum wage is not that it is compulsory for any government to say, okay, whatever is paid in Lagos is what's supposed to be paid in Zamfara. We have experience. In this country, during the time of this minimum wage of 18,000, there are states that are paying 22,000, and there are states that are paying less than 18,000 up to the present moment. But I do not agree that we don't have resources to pay workers of this country. It's like we are trying to underplay the pure fact about what operates in this country. It is the same market all of us are going into. And the issue of the private employers, when we go into this present negotiation and the previous one, there is nothing that can be forced down the throat of the private sector. The private sector representatives are in this negotiation, and I want to say that we commend the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association in this ongoing negotiation. They have been upcoming. They submitted their own idea, and the state government that we are talking of, out of 36 states, 21 states submitted their own position, and everything will be looked into. Parastatal submitted their own position, and everything will be looked into before a minimum wage is fixed. A minimum wage is not a die-hard position that we say whatever the labor has said is what is going to operate. We will negotiate. The federal government, the NECA, and the representative of workers. We have to sit at a round table and agree to a figure. In agreeing to this figure, if a governor says he doesn't have resources to pay salaries, it is a fallacy in this country. Because when we look at the management of our economy in this country and how we do a lot of things that are based on even many governors even putting issues that are not supposed to be priority as the highest priority, we will be having crisis of management of fund in this country, and not until when we address the issue, we will not have an harmonized situation in this country.
Okay, but then don't you think that productivity of states is quite important? Many states in Nigeria, practically civil service states, they produce nothing. They do not generate any revenue internally, tangible revenue internally anyway. They have to go cap in hand to the federal government. So at the end of the day, the bulk of monies they get every time are spent on the civil servants' salaries. And there is still the demand of them, delivering on their promises to the indigents of the state. So the pressure is on the government of each state. So marrying productivity with, payments of salary and all that, don't you think a lot of work needs to be done, not just by the labor demanding for money to be paid to them, but also for work to be available, and then for the government, of course, to do the needful internally before going to the federal level?
Thank you. The Nigerian resources that we are talking of, who created it? There is no government that can play with labor and think that government, that nation will continue to develop. The issue of salaries and whatever the issue of electioneering promises, for any worthwhile politician, when you are coming into place, you have to know that the wages and the salaries of workers are part of the thing you have to plan for. Anybody that does not plan for this may not likely succeed in office. And the issue of electioneering promises, who are the electorates? As we are talking, we know how many electorates are in this country. Federal government alone, the federal workers alone in this country can contribute more than half of the electorate of this country. If we are the one who are to vote, and then you are telling me that it is only the salary that is to be paid, any government that thought it wise to improve the situation of the citizenry must take the labor into consideration. Okay. I am saying that there are enough resources in this country to take care of any electioneering promises that is not out of place, that is so planned to meet the stage of economic reality of this country, not a white elephant project.
All right, Comrade Adeniji.
In 15 years, that a government will say we want to achieve it in 2 years.
All right, Comrade, thank you. Let me bring in Ayodele here because we're almost running out of time. Seeing that NLC seemed to be very resolute on their 14-day ultimatum, but this minimum wage was not originally factored into the 2018 budget. How realistic would you think this is going to be, even if we have to be objective? Let us all sides being objective.
I don't know how realistic it's going to be, like you rightfully said, because it's not included in the budget, and I don't know where the monies to fund that is going to come from. I understand that, you see, the issue of salaries is a hot spot, for the average Nigerian worker whose take home can hardly take him home. It's quite a hot spot. And I mean, the local government worker who's struggling to pay his children's school fees doesn't want to hear anything about macroeconomics. He doesn't care. He just wants more money in his hands, to pay for what he needs. And I totally understand that. However, the labor union have an advantage that the government in power is led, or the APC chairman is a former labor leader and is their comrade in chief. And let's see how he negotiates with them, because when you're on the other end of the table, it becomes a different ball game. The workforce, the civil service workforce employed by government is about 4% of the population. I think not up to 5 million people are employed by the government at all levels. And then think about the larger implication, on the other population in the country. So, and that's the case certain governors have made, that they can't give all the resources to the people that they employ, while there's a larger amount of people to govern, at the end of the day. So,
all right,
let the negotiations continue. And hopefully they can arrive at a figure that is not going to be cataclysmic to the welfare of the people you're trying to protect, at the end of the day.
All right, Amma Pepple, the chairman of the committee, was asking government, we've not even seen your figure. We've not seen your figure. We need your figure so we can infuse it in the committee.
So that we can start negotiating.
Exactly. All right, Ayodele Adio, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For coming.
And the comrade Abdurrafiu Adeniji, thank you very much for coming on the program as well. Thank you.
Thank you.